Redditors, what is the most fucked up thing you have ever done? 1. My grandmother moved in with us when I was a teenager and started to go senile. Our relationship quickly soured. Living with her was different from sending her letters and making phone calls. It wasn't her fault. You change when you start to lose your mind. But honest to goodness, I couldn't stand her. Everything was my fault. Every single thing she misplaced, I stole. I must have stolen it. She couldn't accept that she just couldn't remember where she was putting things. The worst time, she had a meltdown over photos she'd misplaced and had my parents search my room while I shouted that I never touched them. I was a teenager. Why would I want her photos of the garden? I could just go outside if I wanted to see it, for fuck's sakes. One night, I woke up because she was shouting for me in that nasally trill she always had that I'd grown to hate because of her constant theft accusations. Just my name. Over and over. She was in the bathroom across the hall from my room. I didn't know what time it was. I figured it was early because she always got up at like 5 a.m. I figured she was shouting for me because she misplaced something again and was happily accusing me of going into her private bathroom that I never went near and taking it. So I thought some very angry choice words at her and pretended I didn't hear her. She called for me for 30 or so more minutes until it finally woke up my mom. I figured there. Now mom can deal with you and I can sleep. Well, turns out her kidneys had shut down acutely. She was vomiting and excreting blood the whole time, yelling for me, not to tell me I was a little thief again, but because she needed help. She was an 85. That 30 minutes probably didn't make a difference. But she died a few days later, and while I know it wasn't my fault, her extended suffering was. I'm sorry, Grandma. 2. I'm a recovered heroin addict. 9 years sober, and I have a lot of stories of how much of a shit person I used to be. I really can't gauge what my worst moment would be, but I can post a story or two definitely. One day, I was flat broke and on my last bag of dope. My neighborhood pharmacist just recently was arrested for a DUI. Brainstorming, I came up with an idea to try and get some pills at the ER. I still had med insurance at the moment, so I thought this was my best option. My buddy came by and we were hanging out outside smoking a cigarette and trying to figure out how to get hurt, just enough to get some pills, but not enough to actually have permanent repercussions. There was this big-ass cinder block beside my garage, and I decided to drop it on my foot in hopes of just breaking it to at most. I stood outside on the concrete patio for about 5 minutes with the cinder block trying to hype myself up enough to drop it on my foot. I couldn't do it. Psyched myself out too much. I told my friend that he would have to do it for me. Andy said okay. He held it about waist high and dropped it on my foot. I knew it wasn't enough damage, so I told him that he needed to put it up higher and drop it again, to which he did. So go to the hospital, tell them that I was carrying boxes downstairs to the basement and dropped them when I slipped on the bottom step. So I go back, get x-rays, and I am in the waiting room. The ER comes in and tells me that I've torn numerous ligaments in my foot and probably would hurt less if I had just broke my foot. Hearing this, I was excited, thinking yes, I just scored. I didn't care about the pain at the moment, just happy that I just potentially scored. They released me and handed me a script. They wrote me a script for ibuprofen 800 milligrams. Defeat TLDR. Don't drop a brick on your foot trying to break it and get pills from the ER. Doesn't work. 3. Was night manager at fast food establishment during college. There was a bitter prank rivalry between our establishment and the Subway next to us. After months of prank escalation, I crammed a rotting hamburger patty in the handle of the Subway manager's trunk lid, so he went knuckle deep in rotting burger when he went home. That was the end of the prank war, and I've never forgiven myself for crossing the red line. 4. I'm gonna rant my little sister out. During our parents' divorce and custody battle, we were forced to sit in on family counseling sessions. I was 12 and she was 8. We thought my mom was acting funny and might have been banging the counselor on the side for her own personal testimonial interest, still not confirmed. So we were pissed off because we loved our mom and our dad. It seemed like the counselor favored our mom over our dad, and it got rough sometimes watching him become outed by the only two adult forces who didn't love him in this world. Anyway, my little sister and I were left alone in his office. She decided she was gonna take a shit in his little trash can to assert dominance. It was asserted. We never went back. 5. Ugh, this was an embarrassing one that I hope no one ever finds out. One night a few years ago, we My boyfriend and his family get Chinese food from our favorite little place. For some reason this night it doesn't sit well with me. An hour after eating I get that intensely sick feeling, like you have to poop so bad that you want to throw up. Whatever. I go upstairs and destroy the bathroom. It's important to note, there's 2 bathrooms upstairs and none downstairs, which is like a little apartment where my boyfriend and I stay. After I'm sure my bowels are empty, I go back down to lay in bed. Thought I could nap it off. About 30 seconds after laying down I get the urge to go again. I run upstairs and to my horror, both bathrooms are occupied. His sister is refusing to get to the shower, even though it's an emergency, and his dad is blowing up the other toilet, presumably suffering a similar fate to mine. I begrudgingly go sit in bed and contemplate my options as the bubbling in my gut grows worse. Bust down the bathroom door and traumatize his sister. Make the 30-minute drive home? No. It was urgent. I even thought about shitting my pants, against my will, and dealing with the embarrassment. God, I don't want to subject my future in-laws to that. I begrudgingly realize my only option is to go outside like nature intended. Their yard is very open and it was a super bright moonlit night, so there was no place to do it without feeling super exposed, except for under the trampoline. My thought process was, no one has used the trampoline for years, and it's out of sight walking range so no one could accidentally step in it. Great. I do my business, get soaked in the process. It was slightly raining and the trampoline was pouring water on me. Clean up with napkins and wet wipes. Come inside. Immediately throw up in the trash can from the shock, embarrassment, anxiety, sickness. Clean that up and immediately go to bed. Everything was fine for a few days, until my boyfriend's dad lightheartedly tells me how he was late for work that morning. The dog had rolled in some shit and he had to get a bath. I felt like throwing up all over again, but thankfully everyone just suspected it was some type of animal poop. 6. Picking up a dude's head that fell off his rotting corpse when I worked at a mortuary transport company is definitely up there. Also picking up a 5-year-old kid who had a bookcase fall on him. Feeling all the broken bones moving in his tiny body fucked me up good, if we're talking behavior. I definitely attempted to ruin friends' relationships in my teenage years, cause I was a bitter and lonely asshole. Seeing them happy only made me feel worse, so I wanted to drag them down to my level. Luckily their relationships were stronger than my bullshit in most cases. I've gotten a few messages asking questions about the mortuary job, and whether or not these were the worst calls I've ever had, so I figured I'd post an old comment from a different thread. Trigger warning for suicide. Witnessed a woman pretty much break over the headless body of her son. Used to work for a mortuary livery service. I mostly picked up from retirement homes and from people's houses where they had a hospice nurse watching over them, but would occasionally get calls from the local coroner's office. One night I was sent out to a call not far from where I lived. Place was surrounded by cops. They lead me and my partner to the bathroom, where a guy had blown his head off with a shotgun in the shower. It was a mess, as you can probably imagine, but by this point it wasn't super out of the ordinary for me. I'd picked up suicides before, as well as overdoses, decomps, kids, so I was pretty numb to it. We got the guy into a bag and loaded him up on the gurney, and we're out the door at the worst possible time. The dude's mother was outside now. Having been called by someone, I guess? She started hysterically screaming, which immediately put me on edge. I had dealt with crying and mourning loved ones every day, even when I had to pick up the kid. His parents were already ushered into another room. Blood-curdling screams right in front of me? This was a first. A cop tried to grab her, but she managed to wriggle away from him, running up to the gurney and pretty much collapsing onto it, sobbing uncontrollably and babbling nonsense. It was the most raw and unfiltered emotion I had ever seen. She was clutching onto the gurney and like rocking back and forth, to the point that I had to grab the cart before the whole thing toppled over onto the front lawn. I stood there for around 5 minutes, with a front row seat to unrivaled agony with no way to really hide from it, before a cop had stepped in and tried to pull her away, saying that we had to take him. She eventually relented and we got the body loaded into the car, and from there it was business as usual. The reason that one stuck with me so much is because, well, it was almost like looking into my own future. I was suicidal at the time, and a shotgun in the shower was exactly how I planned to do it. Only reason I was waiting was because I wanted to be in my own place, so my roommate didn't have to find me. The dude was even around my age. It was a weird feeling of almost like standing over my own body, and when I saw the woman's breakdown, I could only see my own mom. It was at that moment that I decided that my mom would never scream and cry like that because of something I did. While the feelings are definitely still there and I still think about death a lot, that night was when I decided that I would never do it, no matter how much it hurts. What sucks is that it almost made the pain worse. Before, I knew I had an out, a way to make this miserable shit end. But after that, I just felt trapped. Don't want to live, but now I can't die. Fuck lol. 7. My hometown is generally pretty middle class to poor. There's a bunch of rich people that live in the woods, and one of them had a kid that went to our high school and bullied the fuck out of the kids that weren't as wealthy. That shithead grew up and bought a Camaro last summer and removed the muffler so it would be the loudest fucking thing in town. On New Year's Eve of 2021, he decided to ruin a town tradition and laughed the town common with it during the tree lighting ceremony while people were caroling and giving thanks. Summer of last year, me and a friend decided it was time to get revenge because nobody wanted to do anything about it. My friend's dad owned a junkyard, and they recently got an old train horn from a busted diesel that ended up there. We spent a good week getting it set up in the back of his work truck and decided to wait on it for a little while. A month or so later, we found out he was having a party of some kind with other rich folks in his family, but we didn't know what it was about, so we carefully parked outside his house on the opposite side of his fence. Right as it was starting, we blasted the train horn and peeled out before anyone knew what happened. News got out later, and we found out the party we bombed was actually a wake for his late grandfather. 8. The day before I stopped drinking alcohol altogether, I was in a really dark place for a number of reasons. And I was absolutely using alcohol as a crutch. One of the reasons why I was in such a bad place, emotionally, was because my cousin was in decline due to glioblastoma. I was actively seeing this person, that I love dearly, lose his sense of self and ability to understand conversations and situations. And he was young, just turned 50. There was a lot of light in the beginning, but considering that glioblastoma is effectively a stage less brain cancer, it was almost guaranteed he would lose the battle. The day that I stopped drinking altogether was the day that I was supposed to drive him to a research institute for his monthly treatment and check in. It was the only time I was asked to take on that level of responsibility, as his wife would normally take him. I helped in a bunch of different ways, like hanging out with him when he'd otherwise be alone. But this appointment was pretty big. I depressedly drank myself into a stupor the night before and missed our meetup time. I'd said that I'd be there no matter what, and I wasn't. The appointment happened, and he reassured me everything was okay as he knew the battle was over anyway. But I will never forgive myself for that. Even typing this out makes me feel like the biggest piece of shit. I wish I were sober then. 9. One time, a girl I had minimal interest in, but had mutual shared friends with, had sent me a text basically saying, "I have feelings for you and I'd like to explore where that takes us." I then typed up a message to my good friend saying, "Please kill me now. I think she wants a relationship." Keep in mind, this girl was nice and all, but just wasn't my type. I'm also a people pleaser, so the thought of having to turn down someone makes me uncomfortable, and I dreaded having to tell her I wasn't interested. I've been turned down before. It sucks. I don't want to do that to someone else. I did not mean the "please kill me now" as a knock on her as a person, but as I don't want to be in this situation. You can probably guess what happened though. Yep. I sent the "please kill me now" text to the girl. After immediately realizing what I did and thinking for about 30 seconds, how I could possibly talk my way out of not sounding like the biggest jerk in the entire world, I realized that there was no good way to spin that. I decided to just try my best to explain to her that it wasn't meant to be mean and blah blah blah. I also said that she didn't deserve that blah blah blah. Didn't matter. I still cringe about it to this day. 10. Surgical tech here. One of my patients was at the very tail end of pregnancy, but the baby wound up dying. She was in denial and refused care, and carried the dead baby for almost a month. I was on the team to get her a C-section when she finally came to get it out. The baby's skin was like wet paper. Any pressure anywhere caused it to tear. The muscles underneath had started to rot. The bones were mostly broken down to the point of providing no structure. so it moved like a baby-shaped water balloon. Face looked like something from a horror movie. Smell was easily the worst I've experienced. Room was eerie silent, including the mother who was awake. Normal from C-sections. Been a surgical tech for over 6 years, and that was by far the most fucked up thing I've ever seen or done. That case was almost 4 years ago, and still pops into my mind regularly. And I guess that's enough Reddit for me tonight.